Hi, I'm Lucy. Welcome to Go Stitch. It's Halloween, which is a very exciting time of the year for all the little people in our lives. Now, if you're looking for a Halloween craft that will make your kids' eyes light up, I've got something here for you today. We're going to make a Halloween trick-or-treating bag. These are a staple and must-have for every child at Halloween. And we're going to make sure that your child has the best bag in the street. So let's go. So in this course, I'm going to show you what materials you'll need, show you how to create the applique and the pattern and do the embroidery. Then I'll show you how to construct the bag. It's really quick and easy. It doesn't take very long at all. You don't need advanced skills to complete this bag. I'll show you how to do everything step by step. And if you're a beginner or if you're not confident with your hand sewing, that's fine. I can show you some tricks that'll still give you the same result without any heavy lifting. So let's go. For this project, you'll need the pattern. You're going to need 2 pieces of felt. They're going to be 9 inches square, but if you've got felt that's slightly bigger or slightly smaller, that's okay. Also got a longer piece for the strap. I've used some fusible interfacing to give some strength to the felt and help it hold up under the stitching. You're going to need a feature fabric for the hat, as well as some beautiful coloured fabrics for leaves and flowers. You'll need some fusible paper-backed adhesive and a pencil. You'll also need some sewing scissors or shears, as well as some paper scissors. And for this project, you're going to need some small, precise, pointed embroidery scissors. If you're planning on doing the hand embroidery section of this bag, you're also going to need some cotton or silk floss or sewing thread, as well as some sewing needles, and if you like, some beads and sequins. If you're not into hand sewing, look out for some bling like these little pieces that I've got here. Use a hot glue gun to put them onto the witch's hat. We're going to start by tracing our pattern pieces onto our fusible paper-backed adhesive. So you're going to need the pattern, which you can get from gostitch.com.au. You don't need the positioning template just yet. Take your paper-backed adhesive and place it over the top of your pattern pieces. Then trace around the outlines. You don't need to be too precise here. A little bit of variation is good and it helps you make it your own. It's also easier if you've got a nice sharp pencil. And don't use a pen to trace around your outlines. I know it can be tempting, but there's always the risk that while you're ironing, the pen's going to smudge and get in your iron. It's just not a good idea. So for this project, you need to cut 2 of the flowers that have an A on them and 1 of the flower that has a B on it. You're also going to need to cut 2 of each of the leaves that have A's on them. So all up, you're going to end up with 3 flower pieces and 4 leaf pieces. Don't worry about being too precise here. It's always nice to have a few little squiggles of your own. And we're going to need 1 last little circle for our spider's body. Now, if you're into big fat spiders, you can do a much bigger spider's body. If you're into nice little tiny spiders, then keep it small like this one. Now we have our pattern pieces ready to cut out. So take your time cutting out your pattern pieces. You're going to want paper scissors for this, not your normal sewing scissors, because using normal sewing scissors on paper can wreck them, make them go blunt. Takes a little while to go around the cracks in the hat. Makes it look a bit more raggedy. There's our hat. Because we're cutting the flowers and the leaves out of the same fabric, we can save ourselves some time here. Rather than cutting them all out individually, just leave them as a block. Now we've got our pattern pieces, it's time to iron them onto our fabric. You're going to need your iron and an ironing board for this part. I like to give my fabric a pre-iron before I put my pieces on, just to get rid of any of the original crinkles. The only thing to be wary of when you're doing this, however, is that you don't put your piece on straight away. Otherwise your fabric is going to be too hot and it's going to stick, giving you no chance to reposition if you need. So now my fabric's a little bit cooler, I'm going to find a good position for my hat. And then iron it down. So for this bag, I'm going to cut the leaves and the spider's body out of the same fabric, but you choose whichever way you want. And if you want to do 2 different colours for your leaves or 2 different colours for your flowers, that's totally up to you. Be creative, don't let me stop you. So now we have all of our pattern pieces ironed down, it's time to cut them out. You're going to need your sewing shears for this. Take your time and go around the edges that you drew on the paper. If you don't hit the lines precisely, that's not a big deal. It'll just add a bit of intrigue and interest, make it a piece your own. For the flowers, we're not actually going to use the paper backed adhesive. We're not going to stick them down like we are everything else. But because the fabric I'm using is quite thin and flimsy, I'm going to use the paper backed adhesive anyway. Also makes things a little bit easier for tracing out if you're not confident with cutting out flowers. If you're using felt or wool fabric, something a bit thicker, or if you're really confident with cutting out flowers and you don't need a template, and that's totally fine, you don't need to, you can skip this step. You could also personalise this hat and put whatever you like on it. You could put stars on it, spooky candles, spiders, anything you like really. Make it your own. Now we're going to start sticking our pieces down onto our felt. So we start by taking our piece of felt and we're going to put this fusible interfacing onto the felt. This just gives it that little bit more stability and strength while we're hand stitching. Because both the felt and the fusible interfacing are quite fragile, I'm going to use a piece of cotton over the top of both of them to protect them from the iron. But if you've got an old tea towel, that works just as well. In fact, I seem to remember using an old tea towel for this quite a bit. This fusible interfacing takes quite a while to get stuck down. So to check that it's stuck down, just try lifting it at each of the corners. Fantastic. Now flip over our piece of felt. We're ready to start putting our pieces on. Now this project comes with a positioning template, which is going to help us put everything in place. But because the fabric is quite thick, we can't do what we would normally do and put that piece of felt on top. We won't be able to see anything if we do that. So instead, I'm just going to put this above and use it as a bit of a freehand guide. So I'm going to start with my hat and peel off the paper backing. Especially if you're using delicate fabric, just be really careful while you're peeling it off, because if you aren't careful, you could actually distort the fabric. You could end up pulling it or tearing it. And I'm going to place this hat pretty much in the center, maybe slightly towards the top. If you're not confident with finding the center, there's a little dot on this pattern template which will help you find that. And then you just need to find the center of your hat and the center of the fabric. But I'm happy with that positioning. Cotton on top and iron down. Repeat with each separate individual piece. Now I know that we had two different types of leaves, but it doesn't really matter which one you put where. So just go for it and place them wherever you feel like. Over towards the left-hand side of the hat, we're going to have a bigger flower and more leaves, and that'll help balance out our spider on the right of the hat. Now I've deliberately put the flower pieces far, far away from where I'm working right now, so I don't accidentally forget and iron them on. Now last one, which is our little spider. Now our spider is hanging not quite off the tip of this hat, he's hanging from the lowest point of the hat. So we're going to just, with our eye, draw a line straight down from the tip, and about halfway in the gap between the rim of the hat and the tip of the hat, we're going to place our little spider. If you have a hard time with placing smaller pieces, that's totally okay. I have little fingers and I still have a hard time with it sometimes. Get a handy pair of tweezers. Makes it much easier for you to pick up your pieces and position them exactly where you want them. Iron down and we're all done. Now it's time to move on to hand sewing.
Regardless of what experience you have with hand sewing, it's really quick and easy to add some little features to this project. You're going to need your embroidery scissors, some cotton and some needles. I've used two kinds of needles. I've used some sharp pointy beaded needles with a tiny little eye that the beads can go over, and I've also used a chenille needle. These are much easier when you're using, say, embroidery thread or some wool threads or even some silk threads. Much easier to thread the needle and then also to use. I'm going to use some grey embroidery thread for my spider web. And I've also got the flower pieces that we cut out earlier. I've used some beads that I have in my stash. If you don't have any beads, don't worry, you could also use buttons or you could find some from your local craft shop. Start by threading a needle and then tying a double granny knot in the end of the thread. I usually double my thread over, but if you use a different technique, that's fine. And we're going to start by taking down the flowers first. I've started with the big flower, and you're going to put the bigger of the three flower pieces on as the base. Secure it down to the witch's hat with a couple of stitches. It's okay if you pull the thread quite taut here. It'll give your flower a little bit of extra shape. And then the smaller flower goes on top. Secure both flowers down with a couple of stitches, and then it's time to add some fantastic beads. So I've got these beautiful flower shaped beads, but you can use whatever you like. And I'm going to use a mini pearl to go in the centre. It makes these flowers really three-dimensional. They're really going to stand out and pop out and look absolutely fantastic. And once our centre flower's down, we can add some sparkle around it. So I'm using some clear sequins, some iridescent sequins, and some more seed beads just to add a bit of sparkle both on the flower, on the leaves, and on the hat around it. The trick here is to go overboard without going overboard. And by that, I mean it's a really good idea to put a lot on. Really gives an extra layer of interest to your piece. But also know when to stop. Know when too much is too much. To add each individual sequin, start by coming up through the witch's hat, then find a good sequin that you're ready to use, and thread it onto your needle. Don't do anything just yet. Next you're going to put a seed bead on as well, so it sits on top. Then you're going to put the needle back in around the other side of the seed bead, so you're not going back through the seed bead again, you're just going through the sequin, and that will hold everything down. You can see I'm also using my thumb just to keep track of the other thread, which stops it getting tangled. Trust me, that's a really good idea. Now we've finished one side of the hat, we're going to start on the other side. Place your flower in the right spot. Don't rush, take the time to get it right. And then secure it just the same as you did the first one. When you either run out of thread or it's time to finish a section, flip your work over and secure the thread on the back with a few little stitches. Then use your scissors to cut off the rest. Now it's time to do the spider's web. You're going to take your embroidery floss and you're going to cut off a section that's about 30 centimeters long, or as long as your forearm. Split it into two, so you only want 3 threads out of the 6. Thread your needle and then tie a knot at the end. If it's easier to turn your work, you can do so here. We're going to do one big straight stitch from the hat right down to the spider. And then I'm going to start with his back legs. He's holding onto his web, onto his rope. So I'm going to do his 2 back legs touching the web strand that we've got from the hat. You're going to find it easier to come in through the hole that you made previously, so don't try and come up through the body of the spider. And you want to make sure that your stitches all go just underneath the edge of the spider's body. Position your legs anywhere you like them. If you want crazy curly legs, you go for it. Careful you don't get too tangled. And then onto the other side. So just repeat the process, coming up. And now we've finished his legs, we're going to start on his eyes. So turn your work over and just secure that embroidery floss on the back with a couple of stitches. Use your scissors to snip. And then you're going to go back and use the beading needle again. Secure your needle to the back of the work. And just bring it up where you want the first seed bead for the eye to go through. I'm going to use some tiny dark little seed beads. I'm really being careful with that remaining thread. So there's one eye, and repeat the process with the other eye. And there you have it. Secure your thread on the back and snip it off. And you're all done. We're ready to sew the bag now.
Now that we've finished our embroidery, it's time to put our little bag together. So I have my front piece of my bag, my back piece. I have the long strip that we're going to use to make handles. I have some pins, my sewing scissors, and a ruler. So to start with, we're going to put the front and the back pieces to one side because we don't need those right now. And we're going to measure out our strip for the handles. So we want our handles to be about 14 inches long. This strip is 1.5 inches wide. So I'm going to lay them one on top of the other, make sure the ends are even. Find where I get to 14 inches, bring my shears in and snip off the excess. Now I have two 14-inch by 1.5 inch strips ready for the handles. Now that we have our handles, we have to work out where to put them. So this is where you're going to need your back piece and your front piece again, and turn your front piece over because you're going to pin your handles to the inside of the bag. One handle for each piece. Start by measuring 1.5 inches in and 1 inch down. So I want my handle to come here. There's 1.5 inches in and 1 inch down. Move my ruler out of the way and pin my handle just temporarily. Going to measure the same on the other side. So 1.5 inches in and 1 inches down. And we're going to flip our handle around. Now we're not going to turn it over. So we want to use the same side to be facing us. And position the handle. Move your ruler out of the way, and pin. There's the front of the bag. And repeat for the back. Now our handles are pinned, we're going to take them to the machine. We're going to do 2 long lines of stitching along the top of each piece to hold these down. Because of the felt, because of the way it puffs up around the stitching, you won't even see these really on the front once it's finished. And because this is a little project, we're going to completely prep our pieces for sewing before we take them to the machine. So we're going to mark 1 inch square out of each lower corner. Now there are a number of ways you can do this. You can just guesstimate, but I'm going to use tailor's chalk and just measure mine out. You could technically use a pen since it's going on the inside of the bag, but I prefer tailor's chalk. Now that we've marked our 1 inch squares, we're going to use our sewing scissors to cut them out. Now our pieces are ready to take to the machine. Now that we've prepared our handles, it's time to sew. You're going to want to sew a 1/2 inch line just across the top. Remove your pins as you go. And if you see that you're getting any of this bunching up, just raise your foot, straighten it out, put your foot down, and continue sewing your 1.5 inch line. Now our handles are down and it looks barely noticeable on the front. Nice and neat. Repeat for the other side. Now that we have our handles on both sides, I'm going to place the front over the top of the back. Lining up these little corners.
If you have a hard time doing this at your machine, there's nothing wrong with taking it back to the table and doing it there. And once again, you're going to do a 1/2 inch line. Repeat on the other side. If you have any overlap, like this little bit of overlap here after I've straightened out my work, don't try and force those two edges to meet, or you're going to end up with a bag that's just slightly a bit wonky. You don't need a whole 1/2 inch of seam, so just use this outer, the bigger piece for your seam. And we're going to do the same thing along the bottom. So now that we have our corners, you're going to pull and then ease, and you get this nice line that we're going to sew through. We're also going to pull the seam apart on both the front and the back. So we have this sandwich, and we're going to sew through all of those layers. This is going to form the bottom corner, so make sure that you reverse stitch over the start and the finish just for a bit of extra strength. And as we did before, when you're hitting the bunching up part, lift up your foot, smooth everything out, and place it back down again. There's no need to rush. Have your machine set on really slow here. And there's our first corner finished. So we've just gone straight across the bottom. And we're going to repeat on the other side.
Now that we've got our little inside out bag, we've sewn down the edges and we've sewn the handles on. But just the last thing we need to do is just trim off any excess on this corner. So with a pair of sewing scissors, just go straight across the edge, and you want a 1/4 inch seam left behind. And the same on the other side. Now it's time to turn our bag inside out. Well, the right way out. Make sure you really get into those corners, give them a good push. And to help your bag stand up, pinch the bottom corners. And we're just going to finger press a crease along the bottom. You don't need to iron it. I mean, you can if you want to, but you don't need to iron it. And the same thing on the back as well. That's going to help our little bag stand up. And there we are. Love the little spider in this one. And that's it. I hope you've enjoyed making this little trick-or-treat bag as much as I have. I can't wait for Halloween where I get to share it with my kids. Wishing you all the spooky fun in the world. Look out for my next video. Thanks, I'm Lucy. This is Go Stitch.